0 to 60 test. Wow! There comes that second gear. 0 to 60 in 3.95 seconds. If that's not electric, I'm not sure what is. Wow. Indeed, the Audi e-tron GT is absolutely sublime to drive, and we'll talk about performance very shortly. But before doing that, we have to talk about its asking price. It starts from £80,000, and that is without all the other options that you add on top. There is, of course, the top spec Vossprung version, which we have on review today, and that costs around £106,000. Now, the e-tron GT sits between the Taycan 4S and the Taycan rear-wheel drive, and in this review we're comparing the two vehicles in quite a lot of detail. In case you're interested in my Taycan Turbo review, which by the way starts from £115,000 and at the time with the option was around £139,000, do check it up on your pop-up banner in the description below or indeed in the pinned comments. Now, before proceeding with this detailed review and of course comparison, do subscribe if you haven't already and hit that bell notification so you get notified each time a new review goes live on the channel. And so let's jump straight into it and talk about its performance, because of course that's one of its unique selling points. Now, at the launch that you saw at the beginning of the video, I had it tested from 0 to 60 miles an hour in 3.95 seconds, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, this is achieved because the Audi, very much like its Porsche sibling, has two electric motors, one on each axle. Now, combined, these output 390 kilowatts of power. That's the same as 523 horsepower, and if you aren't launching it, this power figure does drop slightly to a measly 350 kilowatts of power, and that's the equivalent of around 469 horsepower. Now, given it's an electric powertrain, it does also mean that you have got instant amounts of torque, 640 Newton meters to be specific in launch control, and in normal mode it's 630 Newton meters of torque. Effectively, this car is a lot of fun to drive, specifically when you are launching it, or even if you're just putting your foot down and doing an overtake maneuver on the motorway. Speaking of which, its top speed is limited, so to speak, at 152.2 miles an hour. I like how specific the Germans are when it comes to that, because of course this car might be used by a lot of Germans on the German Autobahn, and when you're unrestricted then you want to go as fast as possible, at least in a safe manner. Now, one thing I did notice when I was going at speed on the motorway and on country roads is that when you really do put your foot down, you do feel that kick on that secondary gear. Now, the e-tron GT, again very much like its Porsche sibling, has a 2-speed transmission, and as a result means that, well, you can feel it a little bit more than you would do on the Porsche Taycan, at least from my experience on the Porsche Taycan Turbo. This caught me by surprise because it kind of reminds me of the BMW E46 SMG, or should I say the CSL variant, where you can really feel the kick when you're going from the gears. It's not something I was expecting given my pretty great experience with the Porsche Taycan Turbos, well, 2 gears, and of course you can't play around with the gears, it's all automatic, but again, it was a little differentiation between the two cars. Now, another thing that I did notice between the two vehicles is that the Porsche Taycan has got a little bit extra personality. Now, given both cars have an all-wheel drive system, one might expect that they will kind of behave the same around a corner. Well, I found that the e-tron GT was just a lot more composed. Imagine it as the safer, younger sibling which doesn't want to take any risks when on the road, whereas the older sibling is a little bit more experienced on the road and doesn't mind kicking its back end out a little bit. That's what it felt like driving the Porsche Taycan Turbo and comparing it to the e-tron GT Vossprung version. So in this respect, if you want that extra bit of driver's feel and that, well, tremendous experience that one might expect from a high-performance EV, I still think the Porsche Taycan comes out on top here. However, a close second is the Audi e-tron, and it is definitely still a step above the Tesla Model S. Even the Plaid and Plaid Plus versions, I think many will struggle to find that same sort of driver's feel in a Tesla vehicle in comparison to a vehicle that is made by these German manufacturers, which at heart come from a petrol background. Now, to aid with cornering, a little spoiler does pop up every now and then, and that is automatically done. So this is just to help with its aerodynamics. Elsewhere, the Audi uses the Quattro vectoring system, according to the manufacturer, that allows the wheels can independently adjust depending on the scenario. Now, speaking about the wheels being independently adjustable, the adaptive air suspension is phenomenal. Now, the air suspension does come as standard in the RS and the Vossprung versions. You will have adaptive suspension on the regular e-tron GT, which therefore might behave slightly differently. What I will say in the Vossprung version is that the air suspension is an absolute dream. I had the same sort of experience when I was driving the Porsche Taycan Turbo, which similarly used a adaptive air suspension, and it meant that when you're going at speed and of going around corners, you felt in total control of the car. And yet when you were pottering around town, the car would still eat up all the potholes and the uneven roads that you might go over. Specifically for people like myself who live in London, it's definitely something that I noticed on the e-tron GT, and something I certainly appreciated. Again, something that the Tesla can't quite match in this domain. Now, another area where I personally think the Audi and the Porsche stand out in comparison to the Tesla counterpart is in terms of the brake department. Now, the e-tron GT as standard has got 360mm 6-piston front brakes and 358mm 4-piston rear brakes, which is seriously impressive as a standard configuration. Now, the RS model does take it a little bit larger than this, and you can also get ceramic brakes, which then go an even step further. And I think this will only be handy for those people who frequent track days or are going to be, let's say, racing the e-tron GT around the circuit. Now, another key consideration when buying an electric vehicle, specific one that's fully electric such as the Audi e-tron GT, is range. Now here, the Porsche Taycan that I tested, the Turbo, had the same sort of configuration in terms of kilowatt hours. In other words, it's also got a 93.4 kilowatt hour battery, and you've got 84 kilowatt hour of net usage that you can have. Now, the Porsche Taycan Turbo achieved around 190 miles, which I found pretty measly. Now, the e-tron GT does a slightly better job. I had it tested at 230 to 250 miles in mixed driving conditions. That's with the climate controls on, driving in normal driving mode, and, well, just using the e-tron GT's power every now and then as well. So, of course, you could probably achieve more, or you could achieve less if you're going to be constantly launching the car, for example. But what I'm trying to say over here is that it does better than the Porsche Taycan Turbo. But here, both cars are absolutely decimated in the range department when compared to the likes of the Tesla Model 3, and let alone the Tesla Model S, which is its like-for-like comparison. Indeed, the Tesla Model S is going to achieve way more than 300 miles on a single charge in mixed driving conditions, and as a result, if you're looking for the longest range high-performance EV, that is still gonna reign supreme is the Tesla. And here, Audi and Porsche still have to do a lot of catching up. Now, another element where I feel that Tesla has really come out on top, and some other manufacturers as well, is to do with regenerative braking. Here, the Audi e-tron is very light in its approach. Very much like the Porsche Taycan, it offers around 0.13 Gs of deceleration when you lift off from the accelerator pedal. Now, you can customize this via the flappy paddles, but even in its harshest regenerative braking mode, so therefore you go all the way on the minus button, it just doesn't decelerate enough. So here I'm going around, 40 miles an hour. If I just decelerate, I go to 38, 35, 33. So it is decelerating, but just not to that level where I can come to a complete standstill. So of course this won't be a problem on the motorway, but if you're going in and around town, it can become a little bit cumbersome. Now, of course, aside from regenerative braking, one can also plug it in. It is an electric vehicle after all. Now, on the passenger side, at least in the UK, you have got your DC fast charging, where the CCS input is capable of a 270 kilowatt input. This will take you from 0 to 80% in roughly 25 minutes. If you were to go on a 100 kilowatt charger, this time will increase to around 45 minutes. If you find a 50 kilowatt charger instead, this will take around an hour and a half. Now on the driver's side, again in the UK, you've got a Type 2 input. So yes, you do have 2 charging inlets, but there's no DC rapid charging on the driver's side. Now the Type 2 input supports a 11 kilowatt charge, or of course you can get the 22 kilowatt onboard charger option as well. But frankly, I think a lot of people will be accustomed to the 7 kilowatt wall box chargers, be it as a public or of course at home or workplace. And here, if you're going from 0 to 100%, it will take you roughly 14 hours. If you go for a 3-pin socket, by the way, it will take a whopping 28 hours. Now, while we're outside, this gives me the opportunity to talk about its exterior design, which in my opinion is sublime. It doesn't quite take the cake in comparison to the Porsche Taycan, but I think it will be more appealing than the Tesla Model S. But of course, that is very subjective, so I'd be intrigued to hear which vehicle you would prefer to be seen driving. Now, from the front, you've got a relatively elongated bonnet, which does take a little bit of getting used to, and specifically in terms of spatial awareness. As for the front, it's covered, as you might expect from an electric vehicle, to improve aerodynamic efficiency, and you've got some slits at the front bumper to feed air through to the brakes, and also, of course, to take it around the side of the vehicle too. Now, speaking about the side, you do get 20-inch alloys that come as standard. I would suggest the £300 option, which adds a glossy alloy. It just makes it look just a little bit better. But pictured are the RS rims, which are 21-inch alloys instead. And well, again, this just gives it that sporty profile. Now, as for the rear of the vehicle, you do have that kind of e-tron look, where the LED tail lights go from one end to the other around the boot lid as well. And it just makes it look a little bit futuristic, and in my opinion gives it that really cool type of design. There's also a nice diffuser as well, kind of similar to the one that you would have seen in the Porsche Taycan. Now, similarly, in terms of its interior, the Audi e-tron oozes quality, and I would go as far as saying that it's better than the Porsche Taycan and even a Tesla Model S, whereby the Porsche uses a separate display for climate controls. Well, Audi have resorted to physical buttons instead, which in my opinion are far more intuitive to use when you're on the go. And in comparison to the Tesla Model S, it doesn't resort to a singular display to do all different functions. Instead, you've got still physical buttons and stalks for you to play around with. Now, on the subject of that, the 10.1-inch display is very vivid and very responsive. And furthermore, unlike the Porsche, it supports both Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and both work flawlessly. Now, in terms of the center console unit, you do have a small little compartment storage for you to place, let's say, some small size goods. You've got 2 cup holders and the center armrest. Just again, a little bit of a little nod to how Audi have thought this through. The center armrest supports a phone holder, which also doubles up as a wireless charging unit. Now here, a large size smartphone, while connected, can be plugged in over here, whereas some of its competitors don't have that function. Now, if you do connect up your smartphone to the infotainment system via USB, you'll be able to play back audio at the highest quality. If you do resort to Bluetooth instead, you've got the SBC and AAC codecs. For those people who are subscribed to the channel, you will know that I do dedicated audio reviews of every vehicle that I review, and very much the same case is with the Audi e-tron. So if you'd like to see the dedicated review of the Bang & Olufsen system that's comprised within the e-tron Vorsprung version, do definitely check it out on the pop-up banner, in the description below, or in the pinned comments. Now, following on with the theme of technology, we do have to talk about the 12.3-inch instrument cluster, and very much with like a lot of Audi vehicles out there on the market, the instrument cluster is just absolutely splendid. It gives you all the key information that you want. You can customize it to a certain degree, and you can also display the built-in map navigation. It's a shame, however, that Android Auto, when connected, and let's say you have navigation data, doesn't integrate itself within the instrument cluster like you'd find, for example, in the likes of the Polestar 2. Now, before proceeding from the front of the cabin, I should also mention the steering wheel, which in my opinion, the e-tron GT's one feels really nice to grip, and it's got kind of this cut-off design towards the end, which means that people who are a little bit taller or with longer legs like myself won't be left a bit too squished. Furthermore, I do like the fact they've integrated physical buttons, so no capacitive or haptic feedback buttons to play around with, and some physical volume wheels and buttons to adjust your instrument cluster. And then you've got these nice sized flappy paddles which are found behind, and that's to adjust the regenerative braking. I will say, however, subjectively I still prefer the feel and the look of the Porsche Taycan steering wheel, but of course you might not really mind between the two because both of them still provide a premium experience. Now, moving on to comfort, I do have to talk about these cushiony soft seats. Both at the front and at the rear of the cabin, I'm extremely impressed, and it's kind of surprising for a car of its class to have these really nice soft cushiony seats, but ones which also will keep you firmly in place, at least at the front, when you're going at speed around country roads. Now, as standard, you do get 8-way electronic seats at the front, but you can also get 18-way support, and even with a massage function like you get in the Volkswagen version, and these are absolutely phenomenal. I used the massage function while I was doing my drive test. I must say it did relieve a little bit of back pain just from sitting down on the computer all day. Now, back in terms of the rear of the cabin, the legroom is absolutely spectacular. I mean, they've absolutely nailed this. I can't believe how much legroom I've got. Now, bear in mind, I've got relatively long legs and I'm just under 6 foot, and here I feel that someone who's maybe 6'7" with, well, long legs won't have a problem if they slouch. The reason I say that, because headroom at the back is a little bit limited. Specifically, if I put my head back, just the top segment of my hair is touching the top lining of the roof. Now, of course, it will depend on how you seat, but in this respect, if you've got rear occupants and they're just around 6'2" or so, they'll be comfortably sat. And furthermore, you can seat 5 occupants, so you don't have to worry about maybe getting an option, because that comes as standard. Now, the little segment over here can be dropped down and therefore reveals an armrest and also 2 cup holder spaces, which makes it convenient. You've also got climate controls for rear occupants and even 2 USB ports found underneath the center seat for charging purposes. Now, moving on from that, I should also mention the panoramic glass roof, which also comes as standard. Now, in the UK we don't get that much sun, and I know it's a bit of an exception now while I'm recording, but it does bring in a lot of extra light. Now, it is tinted and it does block out rays, so you don't have to worry about getting a suntan when it is blaringly hot. However, it would have potentially been nice to see a retractable sun blind, where some of its competitors have that, while others, such as let's say the Polestar 2 or Tesla Model 3 for example, don't even have that, but instead you can buy an additional option as a sun visor. Now, speaking about how the panoramic roof affects the cabin, we have to talk about cabin noise. Now, here the cabin noise is actually pretty well insulated, even though the model that we've got here is a pre-production model, and despite being the Volkswagen version, it doesn't even have the acoustic glass fitted. Despite that fact, I was left very impressed, so I would suggest checking out my audio review, which goes a little bit more detail about the cabin noise. Now, of course, another point for comfort is the rear boot and in terms of the access of it. Now, you can do so via a button over here, and if you press it once, the electric tailgate will prop open, and that does come as standard, by the way, as one might expect in quite a premium vehicle. Now, you can open it via double pressing on the remote or pressing a button on the front of the car, so in other words within the cabin. So you have different ways of accessing the rear boot. Now, the rear boot itself offers 405 litres of usable storage space. It is worth bearing in mind that this figure does decrease to around 350 litres if you have the Bang & Olufsen sound system, and that's because the space the subwoofer takes. So therefore the RS model does come with 350 litres instead. Now, what I do really like is the fact that Audi have integrated an underfloor storage compartment that allows you to place a singular charging cable, making it very convenient when you're on the go and not having to lug around a pretty large charging case. Now, the rear seats can also be brought down where the vehicle has a 40-20-40 split. I don't have the figure at hand in terms of the overall cargo capacity that it has, but what I will say is that it will suffice for those people going on longer excursions if you have relatively large luggage, or given the fact you have got that ski latch, it means that you can take elongated goods and still take 2 rear occupants. Now, given this car has been designed from the ground up as an electric vehicle, it does have some front storage space, but how do you access it? Well, the only button to release the latch is found within the inner side of the door. In other words, you can't access this if you're going to be sitting inside the cabin, or indeed from the outside, like such say from the remote control. Now it is very simple to open. You just have a little latch over here and you release it, and then it reveals a pretty large 81 litre capacity, which should suffice for, let's say, your weekly shops or even small sized luggage. I just wish Audi had made it a little bit more intuitive to access this storage compartment by integrating it within the remote control, or for example within a button on the infotainment system, or within a physical button that's lined across near the climate controls. Now another element where I feel that Audi have, well, kind of skimped out is in terms of its safety assistance systems. Now the e-tron GT, very much like the Porsche Taycan, is very light. It's only got basic cruise control and lane departure assistance, and that's about it. If you want the fantastic heads-up display, for example, you're going to have to spend an additional £1,400 on the regular e-tron GT. It will come as standard on the Vossprung version, but again, that's a massive step up from the regular model. Then going on from there, you have got the likes of blind spot assistance, the adaptive cruise control, the rear cross traffic alerts, the traffic sign recognition. All of these are additional extras, or come within packs, or come in the more premium Vossprung version, which in my opinion really shouldn't be the case when you are considering that the e-tron GT starts from £80,000. And so this all leads me on to my verdict, and here I feel the e-tron GT is the best in its class. Now let me explain. The Tesla Model S is still the best when it comes to long-range driving. It is also the best in terms of 0 to 60 tests and quarter-mile tests, although frankly I'm not really sure how many people will be too concerned about that. But equally, one could argue, who cares too much about the overall driver's feel? Well, there are some people out there who want to transition to EVs but don't really want a car that doesn't give them that sort of one-to-one connection with the road. And here the e-tron GT and the Porsche Taycan definitely do sit in a different league in comparison to the Tesla counterparts. Now, in comparison to the Porsche, the Audi doesn't quite have that fantastic experience that one could get from a Porsche. But equally, the Audi has a little bit extra range. So it's almost as if Audi have come in and positioned themselves in between these two companies, and of course taken a lot of similarities from its Porsche counterpart and the Porsche department, and brought out a car that might actually tick more boxes for the consumer that is looking for a high performance EV. And as a result of this, I feel that it is the best in its class, and it actually gets our Best Buy award. Now, of course, that is just my thoughts and opinions about the vehicle. I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. And which car would you pick? The Tesla Model S, the Porsche Taycan, or the Audi e-tron? Or of course, another vehicle which might compete with these pretty high performance EVs. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and of course subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that bell notification. At least the bird behind the camera thinks so as well. So I've been Chris from TotallyEV. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.